the presentation. So,
Wonderful.
go ahead, Tom.
Well, we'll call this meeting to order and welcome everybody. Thank our guests for showing up. I don't see Savannah yet, but
She'll be here in just a minute.
okay. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you want me to stand or sit or.
Go ahead and sit for it.
Okay. So I met several of you before, but I'm Rick Maloy with Central Utah Water. I'm the water conservation manager there, and I'm sure many of you have heard that we have varying water situations throughout the state, and it's prompted some action from us in terms of encouraging water efficient ordinances, particularly landscape ordinances, moving forward. And so that's really what I'm here, and Savannah will be here in just a minute to talk about, and hope there's a good, healthy discussion. We have been doing this for quite a while and are excited to share, and we can put up a presentation or have a discussion, whatever is best for this venue.
I've seen the presentation. I don't think our committee has. I think they would like to see it, but we have about 50 minutes for that and discussion.
Okay,
so we have.
perfect.
I anticipate quite a few questions, and so.
Okay. Well, while they're setting up the presentation, let's go ahead and move on. Can I get a motion to consider the approval of the minutes from last month?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those approved?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. It passes. Okay. And let's move on. Savannah.
Right.
First, introduce yourself.
Perfect. I'll move over here. My name is Savannah Peterson. I'm with Central Utah Water. I'm the Water Conservation Programs Manager. So my primary function is to help run our residential rebate programs that we have for the district. But I'm also one of the point people helping cities adopt the water efficiency standards to make sure that your citizens qualify for the programs. Two separate permits. Scroll down over there.
Oh, D or D?
No.
Nope.
Scroll down.
There we go.
Do you recognize these files?
Was it the USB one?
I'm so sorry. Have you all heard about or gotten a chance to look over the water efficiency standards the district has sent out?
No.
Okay, great. I can send those over. I can send those over after this meeting for good to review. Click on the presentation of the city. Oh, yes. So with these water efficiency standards, which we'll go over in just a second, there are 4 main requirements that only apply to new construction. So that's one thing to keep in mind before we get into anything else, is that this isn't asking current residents to rip out a bunch of lawn or anything. It's asking that new construction be installed responsibly with water efficient landscaping that'll help us conserve the resources we need. So the programs that we offer, we have 4 residential rebate programs. 2 of them are smart controller and trailer rebates. So if you have a home built before 1994, chances are your toilet's pretty inefficient, so we offer residents with those homes to a rebate to replace those toilets. Same thing with smart controllers. Those can be, the technology's always moving along with the smart controllers, so residents can apply for those every 5 years. These are in a separate pot of state funding, so residents are eligible no matter what city they live in. If the city chooses not to adopt the ordinances, these are not at stake, but they are a good resource that I think it's helpful for city employees to know about. Next one, the two rebate programs that we offer for landscaping for residents are Flip Your Strip. Anybody heard of Flip Your Strip? Yeah, so it's just the park strip removal replacement program. The other one is Local Scapes Rewards. We will be keeping these programs, but in a different name. They've changed a little bit. I'll talk about that in a minute. Local Scapes Rewards is for larger scale landscaping projects. So somebody wanting to change out their whole backyard or front yard or the entire landscape for something water efficient, this rebate helps cover that. So this is an example of a landscape in Orem that a resident applied for and got a rebate for this last year. We've only had the programs running for about a year. This August 2021 is when we opened them up, so we haven't had a ton of completed projects yet. But in 2022, we had, I'm gonna forget how many actual applications we had off the top of my head, but the completed projects so far have gotten $589, and the in-progress projects are projected to get a little over 48,000. I lowballed that, so it should be quite a bit higher than that. That's the minimum. As you can see, we're not anti-turf at all. We're anti-non-useful turf. We want what lawn is in place to be something that's going to be useful and something that can be watered efficiently. So we want to maintain the aesthetics of the yard, but reduce its water use by quite a bit. And if there's any questions throughout, feel free to ask. These are some examples of park strip participants, not all in Orem, just an example of what they can look like. We're not asking residents to just replace their lawn with rock. We're pretty anti just rock. We want to help mitigate the urban heat island effect, want to maintain aesthetics, help us stormwater runoff protection, that kind of thing. There's some examples. Here's another example of some local escapes. These aren't they're not mature yet, so there will be some fill-in, but just to give you an idea of what they look like. More. Some useful areas, but the lawn is still usable. More. And then we offer other programs that are not just for residents. Our most popular one is the Landscape Leadership Grant. So this is for institutional, commercial, industrial, any of those landscapes where grass probably isn't as necessary. We want to still help incentivize those landowners. We want to make sure that they can be installing water efficient landscapes as well.
Government can apply for this too.
Yes, yeah. This also applies to municipalities.
So just so you know, we're applying for this. We're going to work with Savannah and Rick on our city center project with the new city center building that's going in, and we're going to reinvent some of that over there. Although some of it does have some xeriscaping, and but we're going to apply for a grant to do even more xeriscaping over there.
One project that you probably see almost every day, the Holiday Oil that's just down here on the corner. They received some funding with this landscape leadership grant. Holiday Oil has actually been a pretty good partner in almost all of their gas stations that have been built in the last, 5 or 6 years, have really low water use landscapes, which makes sense, especially at a gas station.
And the requirements for this program are a little different from the residential program, which I'll talk about again in a minute, but essentially the same thing. Rip out some turf and get some money back for putting in something water efficient. So we also have the commercial smart controller rebate program. Guys, you just talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, so, and we've worked with Orem City. We've contracted. I think you're almost done with your.
We're about 2/3 done, Jen?
We're at about the 60% mark, yes.
Yeah.
we're actually kind of in what we were calling phase 2 of 3 phases. And as soon as we've already purchased the controllers, as soon as we get them installed this spring, we'll be completing phase 2 and submitting more paperwork.
Yep, so
But we purchased about $100,000 worth of controllers last year, and we got a $27,000 rebate back on those.
yeah, and we've seen, especially with cities and institutions, we've seen a significant water savings, water reduction. I don't know if you have seen that already. A lot of times it just comes from when leaks happen and you're able to shut things down or adjust for the seasons more easily without having to go to each controller and setting it up. But the University of Utah saved about 106 million gallons the second year that they had those installed, or the first full year that they had those installed. And so fairly significant savings. But again, it's not, a lot of people say, well, how do controllers save water? It's the same thing with kind of meters. It's not really the device itself, it's within the management. And so usually with municipalities where they have dedicated water managers, or institutions where they have dedicated water managers, somebody to monitor those, in this case, weather track controllers, they usually see a pretty significant savings. And so we've had really good success with this program, and the majority of our partakers of this are municipalities. So it's been really good. Yeah. Yeah, so we also have a water efficiency grant program. We used to provide funding for secondary metering. We don't anymore because the state's got way more money than we do for that. But we have been working with a lot of different municipalities. We've done a lot of different projects, but this is anything that's not covered in what you've already seen that has some sort of water efficiency component to it. It could be anything from a marketing program. It could be some of the other things that we're working on is there's a canal enclosure, different, just anything that has a water efficiency idea. If you have something that you'd like us to do, then we have separate funding available. We also have funding available for if there's like a water exchange, so if there's a way that we can recapture some water from that type of project, then there's additional funding available.
So, like I mentioned, we have new programs coming in 2023. It's going to be one program that houses a lot of other programs. So our Flip Your Strip and Localscapes program will be within that. It doesn't have a clear name yet, but essentially a landscape conversion incentive. We've made this program a little more flexible for people who want to phase out their projects a little more. So if somebody wants to do just their side yard this year, the previous programs wouldn't allow for that, and this year we can. We've increased funding significantly. So last year, a Localscapes project would get somewhere between 40 cents to 75 cents per square foot. Flip Your Strip was $1 to $1.25. This year, that is $2 for Flip Your Strip and smaller projects, and $3 per square foot of turf removed for Localscapes. So almost tripling the incentive, and we anticipate a lot of increased interest from that. We've spent a year essentially generating interest, getting people excited about the programs, knowing that we were a resource, kind of sharing the name. And this year, with that interest built in, people are seeing a lot of finished projects, noticing that those look nice and wondering why they have lawn in their park strips when they could not. And with that and the increased incentive, we anticipate interest in the programs just growing exponentially.
Do you think that the $3 then, does that go towards, you said larger projects, would that go towards like a front yard?
Yes.
Residential property?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the reasons we're able to do that is the state has funding. I don't know how many of you are following the current legislation, but Senate Bill, it's either 118 or 119.
From last year?
No, this year.
This year.
Well, there was funding last year. Last year had $5 million worth of funding allocated for these turf removal programs. That funding was COVID money, essentially, and so it was one-time funding, and there was some really weird parameters around it. It wasn't very useful in the current structure that it was developed in, and so Senate Bill, I think it's 118 this year, changed the language, allowed for a little bit more flexibility, and then put in $10 million, but that's annual ongoing funding. And so that's a really significant change, but that has allowed, or they have put in a cap for $1.50 per square foot with a match from the district. So if we put in $1.50, they put in $1.50, that's how we get to that $3 mark. We also noticed that when applicants were doing these projects and we were giving out, anything less than $1, typically they were spending $7, $10, even $15 per square foot for contractors to do this work, and so it was almost, the incentive was almost non-existent, and so this gets us a lot closer to incentivizing people to make the change with the increased incentives.
Mm-hmm. So, a little bit about the purpose behind the water efficiency standards outside of just eligibility for the programs is, of course, our need to conserve water. This graph shows the projected water supply with and without conservation. This potential future supply comes from things like agricultural conversion, which, we're not pushing for agricultural water to be converted to I'm not used, but there's some potential source for that. But without the conservation, you can see that the demand is going to really outstrip the supply quickly. And with conservation, like our programs and the other things that the city is doing, we can help to stay within our needs.
And this is kind of a funny aggregate because obviously there's going to be some municipalities that have water and there's going to be some that don't, mostly because those municipalities don't really even exist. Think of like Benjamin and Lake Shore. There's some areas that haven't necessarily even built up a water supply. The other thing I'll mention on this graph too is that you can see that potential future supply. It does go down as well as it goes up, and the reason why it might go down is we are experiencing hotter, drier summers, which means that any landscapes and any outdoor irrigation would require more water to maintain healthy, and this is even more exaggerated in agriculture water supplies. And so that's just something to consider, is that as we move forward, especially with the shoulder seasons being warmer, we will need more water for the landscapes that we have.
So with the standards that we have provided, these would only apply to new construction, residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, and new landscapes developed by homeowners in new homes. So the big asks for these efficiency standards is that lawn is not installed on slopes greater than 25% or areas less than 8 feet wide at its narrowest point. So this eliminates most park strips. We've had some cities say, oh, well, if our park strips are more than 8 feet wide, can we still put lawn there? Yes, but the next biggest one is, okay, I'll talk about this one first. These standards don't apply to areas where the lawn would be less than 250 square feet, or the landscape doesn't allow for that 8-foot wide minimum. So in those really small lots, we would rather them not put in teeny tiny strips of grass, So we want those areas to be as efficient as possible. In commercial, industrial, institutional, I don't know if the slide is missing or if I just skipped it, but there's a slide that talks about the maximum turf allowed in residential landscapes, which is 35% turf in the landscaping required by city code for certificate of occupancy, which I believe in Orem is front and side yards. So if a homeowner moved into this home that had been installed with water efficient landscaping in the front and side yards, but said, I want a lot more grass in my backyard, that's not on the city. The homeowner would be allowed to do that. So we're not restricting turf everywhere, you know. But in commercial, industrial, institutional, multifamily, the maximum is 20% of the total landscape can be turf outside of active recreation zones. So something like a park or a community area in a multifamily building would be exempt from this. Those aspects that I mentioned that just relate to turf, those are the only things that are required to be added into the municipal code to qualify for the programs. The rest of these are just recommendations. This set of standards was built for cities who have no landscaping code in their city code. So we wanted to provide some language to help get those cities started. Anything else in here that Orem City would see as useful or helpful, you are welcome to adopt, not required to. It's just those 4 points talking about lawn. But some of those other recommendations we have are proper irrigation. So it's best to have irrigation that's designed for the plant material, separating things into hydrozones. So not watering your turf and your drip areas on the same zone. That can save a lot of water. No overhead irrigation outside of lawn areas. Drip irrigation should be equipped with pressure regulators, filters, flush and assembly. Those all just help with the efficiency. Talked about the hydrozones. Talked about that. Let's get to the next one. It's another code recommendation we had was to have landscapes installed with smart controllers in place. I think we talked enough about those already. Another recommendation is to have 3 to 4 inches of mulch. Mulch referring to bark mulch, rock, gravel, those kinds of things. I know some public utilities are concerned about homeowners installing bark mulch just for the potential for it to run off into storm drains. If that's a concern, you're welcome to add language into the code that asks for rock or gravel instead. There's a lot of flexibility within all of these other things, and again, this isn't required to be adopted either. But mulch is great to help control weeds and improve appearance. We don't want the park strips or landscape areas to look terrible after a few years, and adding 3 to 4 inches of bark mulch or rock mulch is a really good way to suppress weeds long term. And it's just good. And then making that permeable to air and water helps the soil health as well. Another thing that is a recommendation and a requirement in our programs for people to participate is that at maturity, the landscape should have 50% plant coverage. This is to help mitigate urban heat island effect, help with soil health, stormwater retention, that kind of thing. It doesn't include tree canopy. We encourage trees. We advocate for tree health. We don't want people tearing out their trees, but we want the landscape to have plant coverage at the ground level as well.
So when you say at maturity, then if somebody comes in with a set of plans, then they would put so many shrubs and so forth on there, and they would show that at mature growth to determine the coverage.
And this is one of those rules where we've seen a pretty wide range from city adoption. Some cities will have, like Salt Lake City has a 33% plant coverage requirement. So I think it's really up to the city to say what do you want the desired outcome to be. Some cities include tree canopy in their plant coverage requirement. This is a really important element to think of, and you probably already have something that talks about vegetative coverage. The big difference that we have seen is that as people go to water efficient landscaping, if it's not specified, then we get a lot of issues where people just put in all concrete or their front yard or all rock with very few plants, and that's where we see a a negative impact to soil health, heat island, all those things that Savannah mentioned. And so having something here, whatever the city decides, is really important. And then there is some with our program, and I'll just mention too that it's really hard to know for sure what 50% is or what 33% is. It's easy to see it on a plan, but in practice, we try to get as close as possible, but it's not always. I mean, plants die, people add more plants, so it's just kind of an influx thing, but it's something to keep an eye on and how the city might look at that and evaluate that moving forward. And this, I should also clarify, this would include, if you're looking at an entire landscape, it would include the existing turf that's there. So if you have 35% turf, the remaining area, would only need to be 15% plant coverage.
One of the recommendations we have in the municipal code, in the water efficiency standards, is to add an indoor fixture requirement language. So this would be recommendations for water sense labeled products like shower heads, toilets, faucets, that kind of thing. This is lower hanging fruit, but any water conservation is good conservation. It's best to have water sense and water efficient tools in the home from the get-go rather than going through to replace it later. So
Yeah, and there was legislation last year, and we'll see hopefully the legislation this year that fixes the language around toilets to encourage low water use moving forward. 55% of the water in Utah County is outdoor residential landscaping, and the indoor water use is just not as much of a low-hanging fruit as Savannah said.
I think so. The next section, I'm hoping this has interesting. I wanted to talk about some of the resources that we have available.
Cody, you want to go back?
Yes, if you want. Are there any questions so far about the water efficiency standard? Okay, great. Would you mind clicking on? Do you mind if we go to some links? Is that-
Please do, yeah.
Okay.
So could I clarify then? Has Orem adopted anything, Chris?
Not
related to-
officially.
Okay.
We've reviewed the water efficiency standards that Savannah and Rick are proposing, and our planning staff feels like that our code currently would allow for that. However, it doesn't speak to the requirements for new construction. And I think that's really the heart of what you're looking to accomplish is for new construction in the front and side yards, they would need to have at least 35%, I think, and of coverage. Or how? No, maybe I'm misspeaking there for the turf.
So maximum 35%.
Maximum's 35.
Yep.
Okay. And that might be a concern for some council members in the adoption that there would be a requirement that you could only have up to 35% of turf for new construction. And so we are in the process of, learning about this and educating the council on this before that goes to adoption. In part, we would like, we've invited them to come today to speak to our advisory commission here, but also we have a natural resources commission and a beautification commission that are very interested in this presentation and learning more. I think with the review and the education and the endorsements of these commissions, I think it'll be more acceptable for everyone on the council to adopt the new ordinances. So.
And to clarify, so in order to be eligible for the awards or rewards, you have to have all four of those. Each city has to have all four of those items adopted. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
So, just to talk about some of the resources we have available and how residents can apply, if any of you are interested in learning more about these programs, here's a good place to look for it. All of our residential programs are housed in Utah Water Savers. This is where residents can go and find rebates that they're looking for. It'll look a little different this next year. Like I mentioned, we're revamping the website and the programs, but in general, this is a good place to go.
Can you scroll up a little bit to see? right there. So I don't know, by show of hands, has anybody done any of these? Toilet replacement, okay. Smart controllers, local escapes. What did you do, Robert?
I did both toilet and smart control.
Okay. What did you do, Casey?
Smart control.
Smart controller. I did the smart controller. Cody? Smart. Okay. So your smart controller, then you probably have access to that right here at your phone, at your fingertips, right? You could modify that. I know that on my smart controller, I've connected into a couple. I guess they're public weather stations. They're privately owned, but they're made public and available. So I've connected into those. So those help to show, if there's a storm coming or if there's a weather event or soil moisture or things like that. It makes some live smart decisions on its own. And I felt like my overall water usage was I probably cut maybe 5 or 10% overall by utilizing the smart control aspects. But at the time that I did this, I think it was $100 rebate. Is it what it is right now? Is it 75 or 100 or?
$75 for smart controllers, $100 for toilet replacements, but that covers the cost of many toilets and smart controllers that are on the market. Yep.
So one of the things that will change, and many of you may have been a little frustrated with applying if you did this, it might have been a little cumbersome to apply. We're trying to streamline it, make it easier for applicants. The other thing is right now there's kind of in order to get access to know what programs, you have to create an account. That'll go away, so without creating an account, you'll be able to see what programs are available to you, how much money you would have access to for different programs. The other thing that it will tell you is if you don't have access to a program, it'll tell you why. So if you don't have access to Flip Your Strip or Local Escapes Rewards, it'll say that the city has not adopted ordinances. And that's not to necessarily pick a fight with the city, that's just what's required. It's also required in rule, or it will be required in rule for the state funding as well. And so even for their contribution, they're going to require the few key points that Savannah mentioned.
When will the 2023 program be up?
March 1st is the goal. I think it'll have some workshopping when it goes up, but it'll be open for applications on March 1st.
Yeah, we anticipate a March 1st launch, but so that some of the things that on the website will change. We're looking at an end of March, beginning of April, like actual launch. Most people aren't doing, hopefully we have snow on the ground into April, but most people really won't be doing any landscape projects until mid to late April, and we'll have a press release with the state, because with their additional funding, and some marketing around these programs that will happen probably in April.
And I've in my discussions with Rick and Savannah, I said the city is very supportive of this, and that we will offer our social media resources, and if they have information they'd like to share with us, then we will advertise that and get that out through our media and through our communications and our newsletters and so forth. And we want to be a partner with Central Utah on seeing this be a success.
The other thing that I'll mention too is if conversations are really positive with the council and we feel like things are going to move forward in a really positive way, we're going to keep you on the good list. We don't necessarily need, unless it's helpful for the council, we don't necessarily need a period where we're taking a bunch of phone calls from people that want to participate, where we know that the city might adopt it, within the next couple months or something like that. So we're happy to do that as well.
The Localscapes website is a helpful resource for people in or outside of our programs. If you want to just click through the design and resources tabs. So here, if somebody's interested in flipping a park strip or doing a local scape, Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District has designed a ton of sample park strips that have good water efficient plants. All of these have at least 50% plant coverage, so it's just a good spot for people to get inspiration. They're all free, people can copy them. Over in the resources tab, there's some videos about how to switch your park strip to drip irrigation. There's some more designs, a guide that teaches people how to follow the local scapes principles. It's just a really good resource that I wanted to put out there. Weed control research. That's essentially it. We want to make sure that any homeowners or businesses or cities who are participating in these programs are as successful as possible. Here is a link to our website where we have a bunch of classes that are coming up. There's one tomorrow night. It's about fruit trees. They're all free. They're about an hour long and they're really good, taught by experts in different fields.
Where is that? Is that at your office?
Yes.
In Orem?
They're hybrid classes, so you can attend in Orem at our office or online. And there's just a wide variety of classes, all semi-related to landscaping and water conservation. There's always some tie into water conservation.
The kind of the key to these classes is that we recognize that water efficient landscape design, or xeriscape as it's probably formally known, it is not the traditional landscape, and maintenance of those landscapes is different. You go from, I'm sure those who work in the parks here and grounds know that you go from mowing a lawn to a different type of maintenance. And so a lot of our education is centered around how do you maintain things that are not just lawn. And then we also have lawn care classes as well. But we've had really good success with teaching classes. And in fact, Orem residents are usually our largest share of classes due to just proximity. But we offer about 35 classes a year. Thousands and thousands of people participate in those classes, and we're always willing to do separate and specific classes for cities. So if there's something that you want specifically done at your city center, at your library, we always have staff available for what we call outreach classes, and we do those all across our service area, which is fairly large. And so we do things up in Heber, out in Vernal, to make sure that we're reaching those utilities and those residents of those utilities.
Conservation Garden Park, I think, is a helpful resource to know about, just because they're a helpful resource to know about. Have any of you been to the Conservation Garden up in West Jordan? It's nice. Run by Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. This whole website is helpful, but I really like the Waterwise Plants page. It's a great spot for if somebody's looking for, I really want something that is Utah native and I know will do well here, or I really want an evergreen that'll do well in a park strip. This is a really good place to look for those specific things, or I want something that'll do well in full shade that has blue flowers. You can filter this out. So
Wow.
this is just a helpful resource to know about.
Who does that? Is that Jordan Valley?
Jordan Valley
Manages
Water.
that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they have the Conservation Garden Park, is that what they call it?
Yes. Yeah. And you can see almost all of the plants they have on this website. in
Is that up on
person
their
at
campus?
park.
Right in front of their office building.
That's what I thought, okay.
Yeah.
And this tab right here is really important, because as we do park strips, one of the greatest concerns is those park strips are kind of your snow storage area during winter for snow plowing. And we want to make sure that when we educate people, we always talk about put things in your park strip, especially if you live on a collector street. to put salt tolerant plants there
That makes
so that they
sense.
don't die. And so we try to think about everything, and this is one of those things that we try to convey a lot, but we would also encourage municipalities as they're looking at ordinances to look at specific tree. I'm sure you guys have a tree planting guide already for park strips, but look at certain things that we say, well, maybe you would encourage salt tolerant plants, or language in there that tries to specify some of those things so that we're not losing plants. Usually the number one investment in a landscape is in these plants, in the trees and the perennials and shrubs.
Now, is this specific to this area? For example, I love ice plant, but I've put ice plant in and it's died every year because it always doesn't make it through the winter. So I've been looking for an ice plant that'll actually survive the winter.
And these, I'm a big old plant nerd, so I'll try to hold myself back here. But
We can talk after this.
okay, I'll let you know. I'll send you some ice plant recommendations. But this is really great because within the plants that they have listed here, it lists something called the USDA hardiness zone. So Orem, I think, has a few different zones because there's the benches, and then down here in the valley a little bit, there's temperature ranges that change pretty significantly. So it'll say hardiness zone 5 to 9, so you can look up your address or your zip code, and it'll tell you what hardiness zone you're in, and then you can know to only get plants that fall within that range, which is something a lot of homeowners don't know to look for because it's very specific. But this is a really excellent resource for finding things like that. So you could go to the garden park or to this website, say, I want this, 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 and this, and then go to a nursery with a shopping list already instead of just frantically looking at plant tags while you're there.
The other kind of nice thing about this is they have done a good job of cataloging what the plants look like in the different seasons. If you go to a nursery and you go in May and you buy every plant that's flowering, come June, you'll have plants that all just look green, there won't be any flowers. And so looking at things like what do they look like at different times of the year is important. For plant nerds, probably.
And then this website is mostly helpful because it talks a little bit more about the state's policy that they have. So we've covered most of this in the discussion so far, but this lists the eligible cities that we have so far. This list will be updated as more cities adopt water efficiency standards. And then we can scroll down just a little bit more. I don't know. Is it on the policy? Landscape policy? Maybe. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
so this lists the state's requirements. They are in line with ours. Ours are a little bit more specific, but we've tried to stay pretty consistent with how the districts are disseminating information and what we're asking for with what the state's asking for too. So those are some of the resources I wanted to talk about. Are there any other questions I can answer?
Do you happen to have the code, or some of the code changes that you are requiring?
Like a copy of the standards?
Yeah, I guess the efficiency standards, or online.
Yes.
Are they available where I could share that with everybody here?
I will email those over to you. I should have brought more copies. I have 3 copies of the standards if anybody wants to look at those now, but I will send those to you today.
Yeah. Probably one of the most important things to consider with these is that I'll reiterate what Savannah already said, is that it only applies to new construction. And we've been working with Ivory Homes for, 2, maybe 3 years now. And love them or hate them, they've put in these landscapes in several communities. About 60% of their homes that they built last year had or met the water efficiency standards, and we've had really positive public engagement from those homeowners that have moved into a home with a water efficient landscape or with what would meet a local scape design. And that's really important to us because it conveys that most homeowners are comfortable. This is something that they envision as valuable. And speaking of Envision, I don't know how many of you guys participated or were aware of the Envision Utah study that they did a few years ago. They asked people, what would you be willing to do in terms of water efficiency? And most people, I think it was over 70%, said that they would be willing to reduce the size of their lawn before getting rid of agriculture in the state of Utah, which is kind of interesting. Agriculture does use a lot of water, but our residents value that use of water more than they value their lawn, which is fairly surprising. But it's guided a lot of the decisions that we've made as a district and how we've started to look at and promote these standards and principles. The other thing that I'll mention too is that Central Utah Water is the primary diverter of the Colorado River system, and as many of you are aware, that's in a critical nature, and I'm sure Casey can speak to that as well. But we, along with a lot of other municipalities and districts, not only in our state but across the 7 basin states, have committed to turf reduction. And that's one of the tools or one of the things that we're doing to try and one, protect our Colorado River supply, which is, like I said, critical, and two, it's to show our commitment to using the water wisely. And so we've committed to a 30% turf reduction with Jordan Valley, Salt Lake City Public Utilities, and many others across the West. And so it's something that, you know, a lot of times cities will ask, well, why are you doing this? What's the reason behind it? And that's one of the big reasons behind it, in addition to just ensuring, like Savannah showed with that slide, just ensuring our water supply is able to get us into the future. And this is an easy way. It may not feel easy, but it really is the easiest. And Casey can tell you how much water is there left to develop. Not a lot.
A very small amount.
And we're not going to stop growing because we have some of the highest birth rates in the country, and we don't want to export our children, and that's what other areas may have to do if not appropriate water planning happens. So
Just a couple of comments, then I want you to talk about something else, Rick, is that individuals may not know, but really 60% of the water that Orem uses is Colorado River water. And you're saying, no, we don't get Colorado River water. But the program, the Central Utah Project allows storage of water in Jordanelle and Deer Creek that's then treated at the treatment plant above the cemetery. And so Colorado River is a very essential part of the water supply of all of the Wasatch Front. Even though it's not a direct diversion, it allows us through exchanges to store water in Jordanelle. It's a real critical part. Rick, would you talk about some really good partners as well, like the LDS Church and their desire to participate in these programs?
yeah, so I've been working with the LDS Church for a long time now, but one of the things that we're looking at is changing out chapel landscapes. So right now, all churches moving forward, they're trying to hit that 20% maximum turf that would meet our standards, and so they've been a really good partner. But in addition to that, we will likely be entering into agreements to help fund through our programs landscape conversions at LDS churches. And that is important for a few reasons. One is they often get pegged as having a lot of useless turf that just doesn't. I mean, people are there for 1 day a week, and the church knows that and understands that, and is willing to work and change those landscapes. Each chapel conversion is somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 to change, and so likely those in communities that have adopted water efficiency standards, likely you'll start to see chapels convert. They've been doing this for a long time in Las Vegas, where they have programs similar to this, although way more restrictive. But we should see that, and then also landscape design for new temples and new churches as well, as I'm sure you'll see, will look very different than what has been installed in the past. And so that's been a really good partner. And then we have a lot of other partners too. UVU is interested in changing a lot of their landscape. They actually just completed a weather track installation on their system as well, and they're hoping to save a significant amount of water. BYU, University of Utah, so a lot of organizations have made really good steps forward in partnership with the district.
And just point out, the church is willing to do that in locations where cities have passed those ordinances because they get some reimbursement. That's really a significant amount of water savings for us. And so I know city councils may get concerned about this is government overreach. You're telling me how much grass I can have in my home. But again, it's just for new construction, and it's only for side yards and front yards of new construction. That backyards just doesn't touch the backyards right now.
Would it be helpful? I can show you a neighborhood that has done this.
Sure.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah, as you're doing that, I'm gonna ask a couple questions too. The 20% that you mentioned for like a church or for a non-residential institution, then that's 20% of all of their area, all of their landscaped area. They could have a maximum of 20% grass. And then, but that does not include like a sport area. Like some buildings have a large field where they have softball or a soccer field or something. That's excluded from that.
Non-functional turf.
Non-functional. Okay.
And it doesn't include your sidewalk area. You don't count your sidewalk area. And so that reduces the denominator of the landscaped area.
Okay.
Let's see if this.
There.
Oh man, it's not very. Okay, so these homes right here still have a significant amount of turf you can see in their backyards. But all of these homes, you can see their front and side yards and their park strips are installed with water efficient landscaping. So I wouldn't say all, but probably 80 to 90% of the homes in this neighborhood here in Linden would meet the water efficiency standards. So you can see that's not an insignificant amount of turf, but when you think about carving out all of their side yards, which is not a very functional area of turf, and then park strips, you're left with a pretty functional front yard. And then of course most of these have probably an excessive amount of turf, but again, we'll let the residents decide that. And that's largely in part due to most municipalities don't require actually, I only know of one municipality in Utah that requires residents pull a landscaping permit every time they make a landscape change. So that's not something that any city that I've talked to, except for the one, wants to do, just because that requires, it's kind of like a fairly significant additional task, and it's not something that Utahns are acclimatized to doing. They know if they build a shed, they probably need to check, But even then, I'm sure you guys deal with issues where nobody checks. And so really this is just for certificate of occupancy in new development. So you can see how in practice how that would be implemented or might look. And again, in small lots, especially in vineyard, we see this where the turf size might exceed that percentage, just because if it didn't, it would be, I mean, they have like 15-foot offsets in the front yard in some of those areas, so it's pretty narrow, and so
Yeah.
they have a little bit more. But,
Rick, could you put street view on?
yeah. And
While you're doing
oh,
that,
never
Rick,
mind.
I
There's no
just
street
want to
view.
Oh, it's not? Okay, thank you.
point out that we work with a number of cities on this, not just Orem, but a lot of cities. And for example, Eagle Mountain, which we would consider to be a pretty new city. I think, Rick, you told me that 40% of the turf that Eagle Mountain irrigates, meaning parks, cemetery, park strips, all that kind of stuff, 40% of their turf is in park strips less than 8 feet wide.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you think, well, Orem doesn't have that, but you know what? Many cities have park strips that they maintain that are less than 8 feet wide. And this is an opportunity to get paid to replace those.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to note, is that we're seeing trends that most municipalities, 40% of their irrigated turf falls within right-of-ways, and that's an easy savings for a city, especially if they're pushing up against a wall. But it's pretty easy to remove turf from center medians and park strips, and we've been working with Cedar Hills. They have a bunch of medians that are just all turf, and roundabout islands that are just mounds of turf, which for those who have to maintain and mow and take care of that, there's obviously safety risks and hazards with that. Doesn't remove all maintenance, but it does limit the frequency for when vehicles and crews have to be in those public right-of-ways. So you go from once a week or every other week mowing in public right-of-ways to probably being there 2 to 3 times a year. Spraying is usually what they're doing, spraying weeds in those areas. So
Here's a conflict I have though, and it kind of follows to your discussion right there. I've seen that most flip your strip type things, most things that have a mulch or rock hardscape type thing with plants in it, most of those are more labor intensive than if you were just mowing it, in regards to keeping a drip system functioning well, weed problems, things like that. And most people, after 2 or 3 years, kind of begin to forget about the park strip, and it turns into, honestly, an eyesore. And I don't know how you've seen it out there, what municipalities have, or what HOAs have, what kind of codes they have to kind of prevent that. Because I see very few park strips that are older than 5 years old that are the rockscape mulch, perennial shrub type thing that look good.
So one thing that, you're right in a lot of situations. It does require more labor. I mean, it's a lot harder to get out and pull weeds than it is to ride a lawnmower. What we found is that the time, though, is less overall. So if you look at time maintaining the same square footage, it might be more labor intensive for 8 hours, but that's 8 hours over a season versus how many hours mowing that same area, that same park strip, for example. The other thing that I'll mention is that one of with requiring and encouraging a very deep mulch requirement, so 4 inches, that really, really helps. But it's not going to prevent all weeds. We have seen where it's been really effective, where municipalities will go out on a structured regimen of spraying pre-emergent, and that helps a lot. So they'll go out and target pre-emergent for those park strips on a routine basis, just like you would, fertilization on your parks. The other element that we've seen be really effective is just it's a training component where you're saying, okay, we're training our staff, and we're training them to do things that are a little bit different, and it's a shift for parks departments, from going from now we have a bunch of mow crews to now we have a little bit different. Our employees are doing things a little bit differently. Now they're going out and we're asking them to pull weeds, deadhead, things that are different. We've noticed that the time requirements over the whole, depending on how intensive or how many plants you have in a certain area, we've noticed that the overall maintenance can be slightly less, but I wouldn't say that people who enjoy mowing enjoy weeding, so it's a bit of a shift. But what we have seen is that maintenance crews that have adopted it, and they say, okay, well, we have crews for mowing, and then we have our xeriscape crews or our water efficient crews, and they go out and we've had municipalities that say, yeah, we have crews that love that work. They'd rather do that work than mow. They enjoy going out and taking care of the plants and cleaning that up. But it's a shift. It's a mentality shift. It's not one that is easy, but it's one that I think is pretty rewarding. And we've seen cities that really focus hard on that type of training and that type of education, and that moving forward, that they have really successful and good-looking park strips. Now, if we can only get UDOT to care about their properties, I think we'd be in good shape. So, yeah, what other questions? But it's a good point. It's a fair and valid point.
So if there are no questions, if you could send us then what we need to do to get adopted, then I'll share that with the PWAC as well, and we'll review those requirements in more detail, and hopefully we can have a unanimous endorsement to get this adopted as a PWAC for the city. So, and other committees, we're going to invite you back to visit our Natural Resources Committee and then our Beautification Commission as well. They have an interest in learning. Maybe we could combine, actually, those two at a future time.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's walk us through an application. So you have a city that's participating now. You have a homeowner who says, I want to change my landscape in the front and the side. What kind of timing is involved? What do they have to have? Just a general overview, I think, for this would be helpful.
So, do you want to?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing.
So if you've done a smart control application, there's a few general requirements to get going. You need to have a utility bill that you scan in or take a picture of, and that is so that we can verify the owner of the property. So we do that. We match up that with county assessor data. So on the back end, we're looking at that. But really, to start, you can just go into Utah Water Savers, you used to have to create an account. Now you should be able to just go in and get information. But once you're ready to complete a project, create an account, and then you outline what the project that you want to do. That could be just in a text box, it could be taking a picture, and then that you'll request an appointment with district staff, and they will go out and actually meet with you. In our peak season, it might take a couple weeks to get that appointment started, but you can certainly have a phone call to get your project moving. But once that appointment happens, then we enter, there's an agreement form that will populate, and you just complete that agreement form that says that you have 6 months to 12 months to complete your project, depending on the size of the project. And then you really just do your project once that agreement is completed. And then you let us know as soon as your project's complete, and then we go back out and we measure and complete that application on our end, and it just takes a couple weeks to get a check in the mail. The reason why we do kind of the first visit, the initial visit, is the homeowner will probably measure their landscape, but we want to remeasure their landscape just to make sure that they get an accurate quote of what they're expecting to get in terms of a financial incentive.
And one thing that I'll mention is that last year with the Flip Your Strip program, there was an optional class where people could take it and get a higher rate amount. For localscapes, it was required. This year, class attendance will be required for any program participants for the locals or for the landscape programs. We've had another city who was pretty concerned about, oh, well, we've seen people flip their park strips and then their trees die, and that's a big concern for us, which is a concern for us as well. So our hope and goal with these classes is that people will go into the project knowing exactly what they need to do to be successful and have a long-term successful landscape. So we will prioritize tree health. We prioritize letting people know what plants do well, what kind of mulch works, how to install a proper drip irrigation system. So our applicants will hopefully go into their project knowing how to be successful. So that's another thing I want to mention.
So on your end, you're talking, besides what they're doing, so it takes 6 to 12 months, as you said. On your end, it's a few weeks at the beginning, you have to get out there, they fill out the application, they do the work, and then probably a couple weeks on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and we're hoping to get it down to where somebody applies and we're within a week. We're making contact with them so that they can start their project as soon as possible. I would say at the top end might take a few weeks during our busiest peak season. And then really at the end, again, hopefully within a week, somebody's, and they can move as fast as they want. A homeowner can move as fast as they want. But it shouldn't take us more than a couple weeks at the end to get out, do that inspection, and then 2 or 3 weeks to get a check cut and mailed out back to that homeowner.
So when you had the first allocation of $5 million, did you guys allocate the entire $5 million out?
We didn't spend a dime of that $5 million.
Okay.
And
how come?
the big reason is that there were, so that's the Division of Water Resources that was allocated that funding, and they didn't have a process to actually even distribute that funding. And so we had already been operating programs this last year, the Flip Your Strip and Localscapes Rewards. And so what was changed with the new legislation is it allows funds to go to the districts where they were already implementing programs. So the division had like 2 staff members, and they weren't able to do anything with that existing money.
So you're anticipating $10 million?
So that's $10 million statewide.
Statewide, okay.
The way that it's currently being discussed is that would be distributed amongst the 4 largest water districts, so Weaver Basin, Central Utah, Jordan Valley, and Washington County, and then the Division of Water Resources would kind of support the areas outside of those, and it would be distributed based amongst population. So Central Utah will get the majority of that funding.
But you think about this, let's say we get $3 million from it. We match that, $6 million. Think of the effort it requires to spend $6 million when the average rebate is what, Rick? $1,000?
Yeah, it's $1,000. It might go up to $3,000 this next year.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't anticipate, and actually, a peek behind the curtain a little bit would be, we don't anticipate the majority of the funding going to residential applicants. It's going to go to municipalities like yourself. It's going to go to institutions like the LDS Church. It's going to go to UVU, probably apartment complexes, HOAs. So it's going to go to some of these larger organizations who, one, have some of their own funding to help make it happen, and two, are experiencing probably a greater impact for needs of water. And so we'll see, fortunately for us, a lot of large projects where we put out larger sums of money. And so we should be able to spend a significant amount. I don't think we're going to be able to spend $6 million a year. We don't have the staff for that, but we will do our best to get as much funding out as possible.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Chris, did you have anything else that you needed to cover today?
We have no other business.
Okay. Okay, so I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Let's go home.
Okay.
Go back to work.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Rick.
Yeah.
Jeff's birthday today.
Thank you.
So sorry,
Oh,
Jeff.
Facebook is in.
Pretty well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rick,
Yeah,
when we did that phase one of Millet,